Hi guys, it's Judy from Nutrition with Judy. So I'm excited to share this video with you guys. It is a Q&A with my former classmate who is also a nutritional therapy practitioner, and her name is Christine, and she is known as Nourishing the Littles. We talk about how she believes in respectful parenting, what that is, and we also talk about nutrient density. Christine is a former teacher and now is a nutritional therapy practitioner, and she is also a Weston A Price chapter leader in Chicago. She has a lot of great resources, and I look forward to you guys listening to this conversation. Hey guys, it's Judy from Nutrition with Judy. So today we have the pleasure of having Nourishing the Littles with us. Christine is a former classmate of mine, and we are both nutritional therapy practitioners. We are going to do a Q&A, and we are going to talk all things nutrient density, and we are going to talk about how to properly nourish our little ones. Christine, thanks for being with me.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
No. So yeah, let's get into this. Let's get into a Q&A. So why don't you introduce yourself to some of my followers that don't know you?
Yeah. So my name is Christine, and I am from Nourishing the Littles. I have two littles, a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, a newly 3-year-old. I'm from Chicago, live in Chicago with my husband and my fur baby, and I basically work on uh, serving kids nutrient-dense foods and respectful parenting.
That's awesome. Yes, and we are going to get a lot more into that.
So, Judy, can you introduce yourself for my followers and tell me a little bit about yourself and your family?
Sure. Okay. So, I became a nutritional therapy practitioner, and I live in Austin, Texas with my two boys and my husband. My kids are the same age as yours. They are 5 and 3, and they are both boys. I used to be a management consultant for over a decade. A lot of traveling, a lot of eating on the road got me kind of sick. And now I am eating a very meat-based diet, a carnivore diet, and I have healed my depression, and I would like to give back to the community.
That's
So that's
awesome. I can't wait to learn more. So I wanted to get a little bit of information into your nutrition style. Explain what meat-based is and how that's different than other nutrition styles.
sure. So I started actually eating a keto diet, and I noticed that there was the little like allotment of carbs would still trigger some of my old eating behaviors. So then, like if I had a stressful day or the kids weren't behaving and I was just like at my wit's end, I noticed that I would go back to the pantry and start eating even a lot of the keto snacks, the fat bombs. And so I decided to, hey, I'm just going to try carnivore. More and more I learn about anti-nutrients that maybe fiber is not needed for us. I decided to just try it all meat, and it's done wonders for me. So I don't crave sweets. And as I learn more and more about the nutrient density of meats, I realize that that is the way that we should be nourishing our kids. So my kids aren't fully carnivore. There's several reasons for that, but I feed them a more low carb-ish keto diet, and our main focus is meats and good fats, and that's where we have our essential nutrients that we need, as well as a lot of nourishment that they need to grow big and strong. And so in terms of carbohydrates, and I know we'll talk about this more in a little bit, but I know that they're not as essential. And I used to also feed my kids a lot of those like sweetened snacks, like the low carb with erythritol and all those sweeteners. But I am trying to move away from that and go back to a little bit natural sugars like Manuka honey or maple syrup, because there are some studies done that even if sweeteners do not raise your glucose levels, it can still raise insulin, and that's really the marker that we are trying to tame. Additionally, if you think about it, erythritol is made out of corn, and likely GMO corn, and yet there's no calories and sweeteners. There's a disconnect there, right? So
Yeah, that's so cool. So why have you decided to have your kids follow this more keto carnivore style of nutrition?
Sure. So, I mean, as so my oldest one was on a standard American diet, and I just, I noticed he was always wanting a snack, always hungry, but then at meal times when we would have actual food and, properly nutrient dense foods, he wasn't really eating much. And I noticed
Yeah.
he was very carb loving, always wanting a snack, always wanting junky foods. And as I shifted my diet and learned more about nutrition, I realized that I was not properly nourishing him. And so, I mean, we need fats. I mean, it's in every cell of our body, every cell that is the outer layer is protected by fat, right? And so we need fat for hormones. We need fat for so many other reasons. And so I know that, I mean, carbs are not essential. And so in order
Amen. I totally agree with that. There is no such thing as an essential carb.
Yes. And so we need to nourish our kids with foods that will allow them to grow. I mean, our brain, and I've said this several times already, but our brain is 90% grown, fully developed by the age of 5, and our brain is 60% fat. So if you are not properly feeding that brain, then imagine what is creating that brain, right? If you're only feeding your baby like applesauce pouches and like little carby junk, like what is that brain going to be developed of? And that to me is a scary enough thought that I am focusing solely on like meats and good fats. And I believe that's how you feed your kids, right? Like how
I love that. It's true. I tend to focus more on the protein and the fat, and then I'll add in a little bit of carbs. But I know that that's really hard for the average parent, especially because I think a lot of parents don't even know what a carb is. And so they think, oh, I'm feeding them carrots, fruit, pretzels, and maybe like a roll of like turkey or something, and that's like a balanced meal. When in reality, the majority of that meal is carbs, and
right.
it's just lack of education.
Right.
But that's what we're here for.
Right. Yeah. I used to feed my son the same way. And so if you look at old lunch boxes that I had, it was like I thought I was doing a great job. So there was like carrots and like a ton of fruit, and there was almost no protein and no fat. And I thought I was doing a good job, but that's unfortunately far from the truth. And so, I mean, we need to go back to feeding our kids protein and fats.
Totally agree. Yeah. Nowadays, now that I know more about food and after going through the nutritional therapy program as well, I always focus on when I'm packing lunches, okay, what's the protein and fat first, and
Sure.
then maybe possibly add in a carb or that kind of thing. But that's great.
Yeah. Right. Like I really try to tell parents the key thing to think about is that carbs and sugar, it's just a quick burst of energy, but it's not a source for longevity. So if you think about it, we will have that quick burst of energy with sugar, but if we constantly are feeding that burst of energy, it will get stored away as fat. And that's what insulin does when you have too much glucose, and it's this emergency state in our body, and our bodies just don't need that.
Yeah, I agree. So I have a fun question for you. Most pediatricians advocate for a low-fat diet for kids. Since we're talking about the importance of fat, let's just roll right into it. And why do you think that that they do that, and why is that not a good idea?
Sure. So I think the reason why our pediatricians are pushing this whole low fat movement is because they think, hey, if you eat low fat, your kids will be less fat. And it can't be further from the truth. So as I just talked about, it's when we eat too much sugar and then we have this glucose roller coaster with then insulin coming, and then this constant, once the insulin comes and then removes the sugar from your blood because it's considered an emergency state, and so then you're naturally, you feel hungry because your energy dips because the insulin took away all the sugar, and then it's this vicious cycle. And so that's what causes weight gain. So when the insulin removes all the sugar from your body, and from your blood, and instead of you being able to access that sugar, and when you keep constantly feeding more sugar in your body because you feel hunger, then over time you will gain weight, and that is what causes like insulin resistance, and that's what can ultimately lead to diabetes. But as we already talked about, I mean, we need fat for so many reasons. We need it for all our cells to have the proper layer, right? We need it for hormones. We need it for neurotransmitters. We need it for so many different reasons. And so if you want your kids to be stable and have stable moods, we have to be feeding our kids high protein, high fat foods, and not be sticking to these low fat foods, which also, if you think about it, when you remove fat from foods, there is less nutrient density, but there's also less taste. So what do the food manufacturers do? They add in a ton of sugar, which is even worse for the whole diet, right? And so on top of that, like if you think about milk, when they pasteurize milk and they also remove the fat, they're also removing the fat soluble vitamins. And so instead what we get are these synthetic vitamins. So they add in vitamins that are chemically processed to our milk, and that's where they're telling us to get our vitamin D and our calcium. But I mean, it's all fake. So those are the reasons why you should not be consuming low fat foods.
I know. And on top of that, oh, sorry, that's my fur baby in the background. But on top of that, public schools will serve things like chocolate milk and strawberry milk. And did you know that strawberry milk actually has the same amount of sugar in it as a can of soda? So a carton of strawberry milk is the same amount of sugar as like a Coke. And that's what schools are serving to our kids, and then expecting them to sit for hours on end in a day and be able to learn. So
yeah, I mean, so we don't really, none of my kids ever really like strawberry milk, but they like chocolate. And I used to be baffled at how much sugar is in chocolate milk compared to regular milk. And then on top of that, a lot of times they use corn syrup to make it sweet. So yes, it's horrible for kids, horrible.
So this is a big question that actually a lot of my followers were really interested in. You mentioned one time that our body cannot handle more than 4 grams of sugar at a time. And I would love for you to expand on that.
Sure. So if you think about it, the body has about 5 liters of blood at any given time. And and so that's a fact. And so then if you think about how our body's blood sugar is tightly regulated around 80 milligrams per deciliter. And so then if you think about that and you do the math, and I have a YouTube video, it's called the PB&J episode, but that one actually does the math breakdown on a spreadsheet. So I won't bore everyone that's watching this right now, but basically mathematically that breaks down to 4 grams of sugar in the blood at any given time, which is less than a teaspoon of sugar. So then if you think about a pre-diabetic, that's about 100 milligrams per deciliter, and that equates to about 1 teaspoon. And then for somebody that's diabetic, which is around the 120 milligram per deciliter range, that is about 1 teaspoon and a quarter of sugar in the blood. So that just shows you how tightly regulated our blood sugars need to be. And it just takes a quarter of a teaspoon of sugar to be considered diabetic. Like that's how little more sugar you need. So then think about all the sugar that our kids are fed. It's okay to have more than 4 grams of sugar per meal, but if you just think about how often we consume so much sugar, and we are consuming way more than a quarter teaspoon of sugar, right? And so think about the emergency state that your body has to go through to hurry up and rush in and clear out that sugar, because otherwise it can cause a coma. It can cause so many things. It could cause a lot of issues. So that's where I always go back to that number of the 4 grams at any given time. Like that is where your body feels bliss point of sugar in your blood.
That's interesting. And I think the other, it's important to note that it's 4 grams of sugar at any given time. And you're right, the body can handle sugar every once in a while. But the problem is, I think we're doing it day in and day out for 3 meals a day, 5 meals a day if you include snacks. And it's that accumulation of constant sugar that's causing all of these more severe issues with our kids and with ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are told that oatmeal is a nutrient-dense breakfast. I have to get on my soapbox about this, but we are told that it is such a nutrient-dense breakfast. So we add to our oatmeal, because it's kind of bland, right? We add a little bit of honey, we add like fruit on top, and then we add granola. that amounts to, I don't know, maybe like 70 grams of carbohydrates. And then we send our kids to school with that much sugar. That is a ton of sugar. And then they will initially feel the hyperness, right? All that sugar, they'll feel this hyper reactive response. And then over time, the insulin will come in, it'll clear out the sugar, and then they will feel tired and sluggish, and they can't pay attention. And it's just, and then what'll happen is they need more sugar to then feel that constant high. And it's just so dangerous. And that's why over the decades, we are getting diabetes way earlier. That's why kids are getting non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. I mean, yeah, it's really, really unfortunate.
Yeah. Wow. So can you talk a little bit about what are some nutrient dense meals that you feed your kids?
Sure. So I always start with meat as the center. So I'd say like 80% of their meal is something related to meat, or, you know, meat, an animal byproduct like butter or eggs. But it's a lot of meat. I try to incorporate a lot of liver lately, maybe bone broth, because it has a lot of minerals. It's really good for gut healing. And I mean, our kids, my rule of thumb now is we never make anything separate for them. I used to do that when Caleb, my oldest, was young. So we would eat our meal, and I would always ask him, like, what do you want to eat? Do you want a PB&J sandwich? Do you want this or that? But we do not do that. There is no separation with our meals and our kids' meals. So they will, if we have a ribeye, I'll give them a cut up ribeye, and we'll have some eggs. We'll have, I'll cook it in either grass-fed butter or grass-fed ghee. We give pasture raised eggs. And I mean, sometimes we'll do like low carb tortillas, and we'll do quesadillas, but I'll always add organic cheese or raw cheese, and then I'll add like nutrient dense meats again. But there is no difference with our meals and their meals. And then I also do the same for their lunches.
Yeah, that's great. I love how you're not serving a different meal. Number one, it's just easier. I mean, no one has time to be cooking two separate meals in the evening. Right. And not only that, but then how are the kids supposed to learn to try all these new foods if, you know, they're being fed something separate than what their parents are eating? So it's just all about modeling.
Right. And I saw a post of yours recently where you talk about like the kids menu options at restaurants.
Oh my goodness.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because that was, I mean, I thought that was a great post.
Yeah, I loved it. So it got inspired by a vacation I took this summer. We went to a beautiful hotel in the rainforest in Ecuador, and we were all served 5-star meals. And I'll never forget that every night they would bring out our menu, the adult menu, and it's, you know, literally a 3-course meal, and they're asking you to pick from it what you want. And then they serve my kids their menu, and it's pizza, chicken nuggets, hamburgers, and it was just floored. And so after the first day, I told them, you know, just only show me the adult menu and I will pick something from the adult menu. And it goes back to this idea that our kids why are we as a society not serving them the nutrient dense foods? They should get the highest quality foods because, I mean, they're growing, they're developing, and especially in the short age period that you talked about, so 0 to 5. I mean, 0 to 3 is when the gut is developing, and then 5, the brain. So this is the time to serve the most nutrient dense foods. And that is not, unfortunately, fried foods or really low quality foods from these restaurants. Anyway, and so, I mean, I get it. A lot of people like to eat out. And basically, I wanted to offer other options for people who wanted to eat out and not sacrifice that. So pick something from the adult menu, share a side, share an appetizer, talk about it with your kids beforehand so that, you know, there's an understanding between the two of you that, you know, this time we're not going to get pizza. You're going to have something different. And it's also about expanding their palates. If we're constantly serving them the same types of food always, then their palate will be accustomed to that. And then they will be less likely to try, like I mentioned, the different textures, consistencies, flavors, those sorts of things. So.
Right. And you mentioned in that post also about how Weston A Price, like the father of nutrition, right? He went around other countries and he found what? Like, what did he find?
Yeah, that was amazing. So when he was going around all these other countries, one of the biggest things he found was that the highest quality foods were fed to children and pregnant women. And these foods were generally raw meats, organ meats, fish, eggs in general, liver, butter, raw dairy, things like that. These are the most nutrient dense foods to feed to kids and pregnant women. And as I mentioned, I mean, that's a far cry from pirate booty
Yes.
and veggie sticks of today.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I'm on the same page as you. So when we go out to dinner, we will just have our kids share in an adult size menu, and we
Yeah.
don't even look at the kids menu. Yeah, I mean, it's always the same. I mean, no matter where you go, whether it's an Indian restaurant, an Asian restaurant, like a Mexican restaurant, the kids menu is always the same. It's like a
It is.
quesadilla, hamburger,
Yes.
chicken tenders, maybe
Yeah.
corn dogs. It's insane, but it doesn't
Yeah.
matter what type of restaurant. They think kids only eat like 5 different types of foods, and it's really unfortunate because they should not be eating those foods, because we are setting them up for failure if we keep feeding foods like that have no nutrient density.
I understand this is a tough one because for parents, it's so much easier. It's so much easier to just serve them the kid menu. They'll be happy, and we don't have to think about it. But I think that in today's day and age, we need to step it up and realize that it's time to change the way things are, for the health of our kids and for this future generation, which is projected to have an insane amount of chronic disease, infertility, shorter lifespans than we
Right.
have. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I
No more
think
excuses.
right. And I think the ramifications are, I know a lot of people say a lot of the excuses I get from parents are, well, we grew up eating that and we're fine. Or come on, live a little, like our kids can eat that, they'll be fine. But, maybe once a week, maybe once a month, fine, right? There should be balance in life. I totally get it. And I mean, my kids don't always eat 100% clean. Like it's impossible in our modern society, right? But
Yeah.
to feed only those types of foods day in and day out, the ramifications are pretty serious, right? So if your kids are suffering from autoimmune disease or have allergies or they have like skin irritations or their moods are all over the place where they're throwing temper tantrums and they can't focus, they seem like they may have like ADD, all of those can stem back to their foods. And so I think parents think, oh, they're just being kids, but actually no, I think a lot of that is their diet. And so while it may seem easier in the moment when we're eating, it's not easier in the bigger picture to parents. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why parenting is becoming more and more difficult as the generations are going.
Yeah. Yeah. You either pay for it now,
Yeah,
upfront with your dollars, or you pay for it later in the doctor's office or,
absolutely.
things like that. So it's kind of deciding when you want to pay for it. And the other thing too are these symptoms that have become normalized, just like you said.
Yes.
So eczema is normal, digestive issues like constipation and diarrhea are normal, bloating, erratic behavior, depression, anxiety. But unfortunately, these are not normal.
Yes.
These are signs that there's distress in the body. And we have to kind of get that out of our head. These are not the types of people that Dr. Price found when he was, traveling the world. I mean,
Right.
He found super robust, healthy individuals, like I mentioned, with wide palates, no teeth crowding, no cavities, kids who could swim in like 30-degree water, and they just, their immune systems were like so strong and living up in the Swiss Alps, and they could withstand those kinds of harsh climates and things like that. And it was because of what they ate and being outside all the time and things like that. So
yeah, and I mean, my oldest is a testament to all this. So he was a full-on carbivore, right? So he had 3 meals a day, 3 snacks a day, and I was always like, oh, I have to constantly feed you, so this is how you can grow, not knowing anything about nutrition. And so I would be giving him vegetable pouches and fruit pouches, thinking I'm doing him a service, right? And he's always constantly snacking because I thought that's the way that I'm going to have him grow. And But the thing is, once he started preschool, and I think he was around 3, he got every illness possible. So he would get hand, foot, mouth. We had to go to the emergency room because he had a febrile seizure from that. Now, fast forward time, and now like a lot of his classmates will be out because they're sick, and Caleb will maybe have a little bit of a runny nose, but he never, like our kids never get sick. This past winter, and my youngest is 3, so he should have gone through that whole cycle of getting really sick.
Yeah.
None of that's happened. They might have a cold for half a day or a day, but nothing that knocks them out like Caleb used to get sick. Caleb used to get a lot of weird skin rashes and like hives, and now they don't get that. So it's such a clear indication to me that it's the food. There's this one incident where my husband took them to Panda Express. Not the proudest moment, but then that evening, I don't know if it's the inflammatory oils or the the bad carbs or whatever it was, but they started getting rashes, and then and again, it was like the clear indication, like, look, and I was showing my husband, like during their bath time, they're getting hives, and it has to be the food. Like, what other exposure did they have? And so, I mean, I think if parents just were to commit and eat maybe just solid nutrient dense foods for 1 to 2 weeks, they will see a huge shift in their kids' behavior, as well as like symptoms they have in physically.
Yeah, I totally agree. So can you share with us how can parents transition from packaged foods to real foods? What are some tips that you would have?
So I think first and foremost, I would clear out the pantry. So go through your refrigerator, go through your pantry, and any foods that you know deep down aren't probably the best quality foods, I would get rid of them. Maybe you have a little small section in your pantry that are like the less than high quality foods, but you're going to permit it. Maybe you have a little bit so that occasionally you guys have a treat. Maybe initially you don't have that at all, so that it's just, you remove it from your environment, then the easier it is, right? Like in James Clear's Atomic Habits book, he talks about when you change your environment and you remove things from your environment, then the temptation is less there. So maybe initially, if you remove all bad foods in your pantry, your kitchen, your house, the less temptation you have, right? So it takes more effort to go drive to the market to get that junky food. I think doing that, and then like you had already mentioned, modeling. So making sure that as parents, you are, practicing what you're preaching. You don't tell your kids, hey, don't eat the fries, but then you're eating a bag of chips, right? So you need to make sure that, I saw a quote the other day, like, if you're willing to die for your kids, then why wouldn't you be willing to thrive for your kids, right? So like, eat the nutrient dense foods, eat foods that will make you properly flourish and live, and then let your kids be able to live and thrive that way, right? So, those two things. So clean out your pantry, make sure to model behavior that your kids want to eat, that you want your kids to follow, and then go to the store and then shop the perimeter of the market, right? Make sure to buy less boxed foods. Like, if the food can survive on a market shelf, it's likely not the best product. I mean, obviously there's certain foods like maybe ghee that's okay, but in general, just shop the perimeter, shop more whole foods that there's no ingredient list, right? Like, the ingredient of meat is just meat, right? So I would ideally do that. And, you will go through a carb flu, and just so make sure to up your electrolytes, because once you remove carbs, your kidneys will start to retain less water. And so when you drink a lot of water or liquids or diuretics, then you'll release a lot of your electrolytes. So that's why it's very important when you do a low carb diet to maintain your electrolytes. And so, I would just make sure, go through that hump, but what you'll see at the end result will be remarkable. Like, your kids' behavior, the nutrient density, not fighting at the dinner table over food, like making sure that they eat. If your kids are hungry, they will eat. They will eat meat. There is no kid out there that will not eat a juicy ribeye with butter, because if they're hungry enough, right? And so that goes also to no snacking. So, I think a lot of the snacking is habits. We grew up without a lot of snacking, right? Our grandparents, when we came home from school, if our parents wanted a snack, their grandparents would say, no, you got to wait for dinner. We now are like, oh my gosh, you just came back from school. You must need a snack. And we feed a snack right like a few hours before dinner. It's no wonder why our kids are hungry, right? And so we need to cut the snacks. And even if they ask, it's probably habit, not necessarily that they're hungry. Let them whine a little bit, let them cry, but that period will pass. If you stop the snacking, over time, they will not ask for it. My kids don't ask for it now, when my son used to have at least 3 snacks a day.
Wow.
What are some of your tips?
That is such an, well, actually, one of my favorite ones is I don't give my kids a snack between lunch and dinner. So they'll eat lunch around maybe 12 or 1 o'clock, and then we eat dinner at 5.
Oh, okay.
So it is a long time for them to go without snacks. And I do that, and usually the last hour at 4 o'clock, it's pretty rough. There are definitely some whines and, crying. They're hopefully they're outside playing, and so they don't, come in whining so much. But generally, for me, that's one of the best ways to get them to actually eat a full dinner. In the mornings, it's a little bit different because they wake up so early. So, they're eating breakfast at like 6 in the morning.
Okay.
And then they'll probably have a snack sometime mid-afternoon or mid-morning, like around 9 or 10, and then lunch. And then the other thing is butter. Give butter as a snack. If you give butter as a snack, I guarantee you, your kids not only they won't overeat, because you can't overeat eating fat, and they will feel full. So I always have I have Kerrygold in the fridge, and we'll just cut chunks and hand them out. Like
no. We do the same. Our kids love butter, and we use so much butter in our liver pate, and so that's how my younger son gets a lot of his butter too. So I mean, I think those are good examples. What do you feed your kids typically?
Yeah. So typically, so I focus more. I'm a little bit different than carnivore. I focus more on ancestral and like Weston A Price guidelines. And so we will eat properly prepared grains every once in a while. Admittedly, I don't eat any legumes just because I'm not really interested in them. And mostly cooked vegetables. In the summertime, we'll eat a lot more raw vegetables because they're available. And that's the other thing is I work really, really hard to only eat local and seasonally. So, for example, I'm not going to be eating tomatoes in January. I won't be eating dairy in January. Dairy is not available in the Midwest in January. Because everything freezes over and it's cold, and the cows produce less.
Yes.
And so really in the Midwest, what's available in January are potatoes, squash, more potatoes. So it'll be a lot more of like really hearty stews and broths with like really fatty cuts of meat. But yeah, so I focus really on eating seasonally. And a lot of protein, a lot of fat, as we mentioned, seasonal fruits and vegetables, and properly preparing foods. Yeah.
No, so one thing I didn't mention earlier is my kids don't eat carnivore. And so I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think if you properly prepare certain foods, then, a lot of the anti-nutrients will be removed. And so like a lot of the grains, for example, you can remove the lectins and those types of anti-nutrients. I don't think you can really remove much of the oxalates, but in terms of eating seasonally and locally, I've been trying to also transition more to that with my kids as well. So like you said, I try only to buy organic when it's on sale. And if you sort of use that as a tip, then your organic foods will only be on sale when they're normally in season. Otherwise, they won't be, right? So if you buy organic strawberries in January, I'm pretty sure they'll never be on sale. And so we never buy them. So we only buy them during the summer because that's when there's the harvest and there's a lot more of that. And so we try to buy that way. And I mean, I feed my kids fruits and minimal vegetables. I mean, if they want it, I'll feed them. But I think the Weston A Price method works, especially if you if your gut is strong enough and you can handle it, right? Like it depends on, like we've learned, I mean, it's all bio individual. If you have an autoimmune or you have thyroid issues or something, you may not be able to tolerate vegetables as much, or even certain fruits, or if you're diabetic, right? So it all depends. But in an ideal world, yes, I think Weston A Price and feeding our kids that way it's ideal. It truly is.
Yeah. So can you tell me, what do you think are some of the safest fruit and vegetables for kids to eat?
Yes, so I try to balance. One thing I wasn't mentioned, one thing I didn't mention earlier was, so the reason why I don't feed my kids carnivore, and I have another YouTube video, and I go into a lot more detail about it, but it's because, well, one, like if I only feed my kids meat, I don't want them to later grow up and then want to try other foods, and then they have a food sensitivity or an allergic response because their immunity is not developed. I believe in hormetic stress, where, if the stress is the good is greater than the bad, then your body will become stronger. I know people are like, well, you could get that through, cold water and red light therapy and all that stuff. But I still think having a little bit of toxic foods makes your body a little bit stronger, right? So I think it's also balance, right? I don't want my kids to only take meat to school and then they feel so different. Like, why can't I have a little bit of fruit, especially if it's in season, it's organic, right? And all properly prepared. So I think all of those things need to be taken into consideration. And also, I mean, I come from a place of disordered eating. So that is knowing how hard it is to struggle with disordered eating. I never want my kids to struggle with that. So I don't want my kids to leave my house and then it's like come to when they're 18, it's like, let's go party on carbs, right? I don't want that. I don't want them to have that negative relationship. And so, through this process, I'm educating them about nutrition, but I also allow them to try a little bit. And sometimes, they get stomach aches from it. And then we go through, okay, why do you think you had that stomach ache? Maybe it's because you had a little bit too much cake at that birthday party, right? So it's the lessons learned. So, I mean, those are all the reasons why I think, again, I don't personally feed my kids carnivore. I do limit sugar because, I mean, in my family genetics, right, we are more susceptible to type 2 diabetes, and knowing that, and my husband's side having heart disease related to diabetes, again, like you have to be aware of genetics and bioindividuality and all that stuff. So now going to the fruit part of it, I used to think, okay, I'm just going to feed my kids berries because they have the lowest glycemic index. But the more I'm learning about nutrition, it's a lot more complicated than that. If our kids have the ability to tolerate a little bit more fructose, which is the sugar in fruits, I don't think it's as bad to have some more of the tropical fruits, let's say, right? I also have learned that, for example, raspberries are very, very high in oxalates. And so I used to feed my kids a lot of raspberries. And now I realize, okay, maybe taking into consideration anti-nutrients, maybe raspberries aren't the way to go. And so I feed my kids organic apples. So I leave the skin on so that to make sure that obviously I give a good wash because even organic foods still have like pesticides. They just might be organic, right? And so I wash the skin, but I make sure to leave the skin on to keep some of the fiber to have less of the fructose be absorbed. I think, like you said, in-season fruits are best. Always get organic because, I mean, you don't want glyphosate on your kids' foods. And that's another topic. And in terms of anti-nutrients, so like one vegetable that's good is like cucumbers. Peel the skin, ideally peel the seeds, and that has far less anti-nutrients. I mean, there's several. I mean, what are some of the fruits and vegetables that you feed your kids?
So I know that tomatoes are really high in oxalates, but they really, really like the tomatoes. Cucumbers, the same thing. I'll always make sure to peel the skin, de-seed them. Bell peppers are a little bit harder. And what's interesting is I think that it's really important to listen to our kids and what they want and what their bodies need and what they're refusing. So if for the longest time, I mean, my kids would refuse bell peppers. And, back when I didn't know anything, I was like pushing it. And now that I know more about anti-nutrients and things like that, if they're refusing a particular vegetable, I'm not going to make an issue of it. There's a reason.
Sure.
And I'm trying to think vegetables. Yeah. So definitely I also do apples. We kind of went through the season. So peaches were in season.
Oh, yes.
They would eat peaches. When blueberries were in season, they would eat blueberries. And that's the other fun thing about educating our kids about this is, a few weeks ago, I had my son ask me, well, why can't we get strawberries? And I was like, because they're not in season anymore. I mean, at least here in the Midwest.
Right.
Now in season are melons and apples. And then it's just going to be apples for a long time. And that's it. But yeah, that's kind of seasonally. We follow seasonal vegetables. So
yeah, no, and that makes
fruits.
sense. We also feed our kids avocados. Avocados has a little bit of
I
oxalate.
know.
But,
yeah.
Sometimes my kids, like you said, sometimes my kids don't like it, and then I'll make it guacamole. And, if you add a little bit of good fats to it, it actually brings a little bit more umami flavor to the avocado or to the guacamole.
Yeah.
So in general, I think in terms of your nutritional style with your kids, you follow the Weston A Price
Dietary
method.
guidelines.
And you are also a group leader, right? Like, what does that all entail?
Yeah, so I'm a chapter leader I have a co-chapter leader, Janine Farzine. She will actually be presenting at the conference in the fall on organ meats. Okay. But together we create workshops and events every few months. And another job is we're constantly getting emails or phone calls asking for resources. And really the main job of the chapter leader is to create a resource list local to the city where you're in that has all of the farms, the farmers markets, grocery stores, and healthcare practitioners. And so we have this resource list. We've vetted all of the farmers on the list. We use many of the farms and the farmers on the list. And anytime someone is looking for, let's say, raw milk or just like a meat farmer, then this is a resource that we can share with them.
Sure. And so go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say some of the workshops that we've done, which it's so much fun, is we've done a fermenting workshop, a sausage making workshop, bone broth. We had a Meet Your Farmer night where we had a few farmers come in and talk about what they do and how their type of farming is restoring the soil and, those kinds of things. So it's a lot of fun.
Oh, that sounds awesome. So how do you provide the resources to, like if I were to want to find raw goat's milk in Chicago, how do I go about, like, how do I contact you and get this?
So if you go to the Weston A Price Foundation website and then click on chapter leaders, it will pull up state and then by city, and my contact information is there. Or if you are a member and you get their journal, it's also at the back of the journal. You can, on my Instagram, you can also just send me an email, and I usually respond pretty quickly, and we'll share the document with you that we have.
Oh, that's awesome. So how do you guys vet your resources, and how do you find them?
Yeah, so between Janine and I, we've been to a lot of these farms and seen them in person, talk to them, ask them questions. I'm actually currently creating a document about questions you can ask your farmers, just so that we can become more informed consumers, because you can go to a farmer's market and think, oh, this is, a good food that I'm eating because it's at a farmer's market, when in reality they could be spraying it. It could be non-organic, you just never know. So it's a good practice to ask questions.
That's great. If once you have that resource, I will add it to the links of our show
Awesome.
notes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I also saw on your Instagram that you make raw ice cream. Can you talk about how to make raw ice cream?
Yes. Okay, so that's something I started doing last year. I bought one of those Cuisinart ice cream makers. Oh, okay. And the ice cream machine is the way to go. And in the Nourishing Traditions Kids Cookbook, there is a recipe for ice cream in there, and that's the one that I started with. And then from there, I've kind of just like tweaked and added my own things. But basically, the base of it is raw egg yolks, raw cream, and depending on the flavors, if it's vanilla ice cream, you do some vanilla extract. I put vanilla bean pods in there and maple syrup. And this is where I mean, you can add as little or as much as you want. I usually will add less and only increase it if I feel like it needs it. But I personally feel that 1/4 cup is actually sufficient. And the recipe calls for 4 egg yolks, and I usually add 5 just for good measure. And it'll call for 2 cups of cream, and I add 3. So really trying to get all that healthy fat in. And I've also made a coconut ice cream before with it, so a dairy-free option. And
That's
with that
awesome.
one, yeah, the only downside is unless you use some form of like a stabilizer or so like xanthan gum or guar gum, it's not really going to be creamy and like scoop creamy the way like a conventional ice cream would. That one was a little bit of a trial and error.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, I definitely got to try that because I've always opted for either like the all natural ice creams where they just have like 3 ingredients at stores, or I'll buy the low carb ones that are creamier. But I mean, the sweeteners, they don't do well with my kid's stomach. I just need to start making my own ice cream because I mean that just sounds very nutrient dense, and I think it'll be a fun.
Delicious. Yeah, and I honestly I don't feel bad about letting them eat it because
absolutely. It's so nutrient dense.
Yeah. Along the same lines, I had made a bone marrow custard.
Wow. Okay.
That was kind of how I started incorporating bone marrow into my kids, is because I was a little nervous. How are they going to eat bone marrow? And it's the same thing. You just take a bunch of bone marrow, blend it in with some raw cream, some raw egg yolks, and then it bakes and it turns into like a custard type dessert.
That's awesome. I got to try that too. So what did you get that recipe from the Nourishing Traditions Kids Cookbook, or did you just...
think so. That one was a mixture of just Googling a bunch of different Nourishing Traditions style blogs of bone marrow custard and then tweaking it until I found something that I liked and worked for us.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I got to definitely try that. Let's switch gears a little bit to from just nutrition, but I know you're really big on respectful parenting. I see some of your posts and I really like it. Can you talk a little bit about that and how parents can sort of shift to, teaching their parents, raising their kids with respectful parenting?
Yeah. So this is really interesting. This has been a kind of a passion of mine that has grown simultaneously with nutrition. And basically what respectful parenting is, it's rooted in the truth that our kids are people. They're people as well, and they deserve to be respected just as much as we do. And this goes, and it sounds so simple. So you think, oh, yeah, of course, I respect my kids. But many of us respect our kids on conditions. And traditional or conventional parenting is rooted in the behaviorist model. So if they behave, then I will love them. Or if they behave, then we will do this, as opposed to true unconditional love, which is, wholehearted, respecting them, loving them no matter what, through their faults. And it's been really interesting because another facet of respectful parenting would be conscious parenting, where you realize that the way that we're parenting is actually is based on our experiences from the past and kind of how like we were raised and we grew up. And so everything from our past and our childhood kind of seeps in to the way we're parenting now and today. And so we're never actually truly objective because we have these preconceived notions and ideas of how we should parent or how our kids should behave. And that, that doesn't really give our kids a lot of freedom to really just grow and develop naturally. And And there's fear around emotions as well in today's society. And one of the biggest, I would, components of respectful parenting is allowing and accepting all emotions.
Sure.
And that's kind of what I'm advocating for, is really looking deeper, thinking about the way we were raised, and deciding if that's the way we want to raise our own kids, accepting emotions, and then tying all of that back into nutrition, because really, I mean, respectful parenting falls in line a ton with nutrition. So this
Sure.
idea of, as parents, we're like, oh my gosh, my kid has to eat this food. And no, actually, you can't make your kid eat anything. You can provide them with the nutrient-dense foods, but they're the ones who are in control. And that's where I think as parents, we get a lot of anxiety, because we want to be in control of everything. um, and so, yeah, it's been fun figuring out how I can weave the two together, and
Yeah,
realizing.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to finish with realizing that as important as our physical health is, our emotional health is just as important, if not more. I mean, we cannot
Absolutely.
heal physically until we are healed emotionally.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's fascinating what you brought up about respectful parenting and how we are raised in this sort of behavioralist method, right? So if you think about it, we even do that with relationships, right? What it's, oh, if he loved me, then he would do this, right? Or
Yeah.
if she was a good friend, then she would do this, right? There's always these kind of like if and statements, right? Like it's like, oh, these certain actions means this, instead of no, unconditionally they love me, regardless of if they seem kind of selfish or if they're selfless or XYZ reasons, because we're all raised differently. And so you need to trust. This is something that I learned actually in high school, when I was like overly giving to my friend, and I was like, how come you are not giving back to me, or reciprocating to the level that I consider would be a best friend? And one thing I realized is they said something that was so profound to me back then, and it was, maybe your 80% is my 100%, but my 100% is still my 100%. And that's when I realized, like, I'm the one that's being really critical of them and not loving them unconditionally. It's like, if you only gave to me or loved me as much as I loved you, then I would love you that much, if that makes sense. And I feel like now, like you were talking about, as we learn these behaviors from our past, we start then treating our kids the same way. And then our kids will then do that with their kids. So I think it's really good to have this at the forefront of your mind, to then be very aware and conscious of what you're doing with your kids and treating your kids, right? So, we're like, oh, if you don't, a lot of people use a lot of bribing. And I mean, I use a little bit of bribing too. I'm like, feed your kids. I mean, eat all your meat, and then I'll give you like an M&M, right? Like, no, it's not the best, but at least I'm aware of it, right? So
Yeah.
it's
That's the beginning.
Yeah, no, I
It's
think
just becoming aware.
yeah, and I completely agree. I think it's the parenting world right now is so interesting. We've become a society where we don't want our kids to cry. We want everyone to be on the same playing field. We give everybody a reward, right? Even if like there's no winner, everybody's a winner. And it's concerning, because when our kids are actually growing up and they're finally in a competitive school, or they're in a competitive work world, and they have to deal with grief or loss, they don't really know how to deal with it. They don't know how to deal with conflict, because we're raising them in a way where it's like there's no conflict for them. And so it's this balance, right? It's this respecting them, but also being aware of, like, sometimes you lose, sometimes you're the loser, right? So it's an interesting point. It's an interesting time for parenting. It's definitely not easy.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I just want to say, if any of your followers have more, if they're interested in learning more about respectful parenting, I have several resources and posts on my Instagram page, and constantly working to provide more information on it, because I mean, I'm learning just as much as anyone else is out there about it.
Sure, sure. And I will link to all the notes in the show notes, all the references we're making. Um, I think one last question I have is, I know you're big on organ meats, and I tell everyone, because I know you brought beef heart jerky to
Yeah.
class one day, and so I always tell people, they're like, "What do I do with this beef heart?" I'm always like, "You should make it jerky because it tastes so good. You would never think it's organ meat." What other ways do you prepare organ meats, and any recommendations
Yeah.
you found?
Yeah. So I just have to give a shout out to my co-chapter leader. She has this blog, Awfully Good Cooking, and I take her recipes and make them more approachable for the average person. And basically, she was kind of the one who inspired me to start adding more organ meats, and not just
Okay.
liver. Liver is where I started. And I think for anyone who's just starting out and you're worried about the flavor or the consistency, the best way to add liver to your diet is to just grind it up,
Yep.
put it in some ground beef, and I promise you, you will not taste it. So I started out with less than 1/4 of a pound for 1 pound of ground beef, and then have slowly started adding more and more. Now, anytime I eat ground beef, it's a 1/2 pound of liver and a pound of ground beef. It's just like an automatic rule, I guess you should say, in our house. And then a few other ways I add organ meats are, like I said, the bone marrow custard. I'll cut, depending on the type of cut it is, I'll cut them up really, really small. So before, I've diced up sweetbreads really small and added it to a soup, to where
Oh, wow.
like all of the vegetables in a soup are diced up really small. The sweetbreads are diced up really small. No one really knows what's in there. It's just all together. Um, I also really enjoy the traditional organ meat recipes. So liver and onions, steak and kidney pie, lengua tacos.
Oh, yes, yes.
Just trying to take these traditional dishes that our ancestors would eat and making them more, I guess, friendly for kids. With the beef heart, I tried beef heart multiple times, and my oldest, my 5-year-old, was just really against it. He was just, he would just say, "Mom, is this heart? I'm not eating heart." And so finally I thought, what if I were to just slice this up really thin, marinate it, and put it in the dehydrator and see what would happen? And I did it one time without telling him it was heart. It was gone in a matter of like hours. I mean, they just like devoured it. The husband did as well. And ever since then, now I'm not afraid. I'll tell him it's heart, and he's like, "Yeah, I love beef heart jerky. It's so good."
Yeah, no, it's really good. It's really good. The one you
Um,
brought to class, no idea. Yeah, it was pretty good.
I know. It was the best that I was, tricking people into eating their organ meat. So yeah, if you're scared of a certain organ meat, I would try dehydrating it, chopping it up really, really small. Um, maybe even starting out with, you could like try frying some of them. And just, I always say small. So start small and then incorporate
Work your way
more
up.
and more. I know a lot of people will cut them up and freeze them and just like consume them as if it were like a pill. And I think that's one way to do it as well. But I really want my kids to develop a taste for it and be accustomed to eating it, and for it to be something that they enjoy eating and their body craves.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, because so I've tried the beef liver pills, and just from what we've learned, the fact that we're not chewing it,
Yes.
my instincts are, well, we're not starting the digestive process. I mean, granted, we take pills this way too, but I mean, normally we take pills with food, and so the digestion process is already there. But when you're just swallowing these, I just felt like I was kind of choking on because I had 1.5 ounces of frozen raw beef liver, and I did feel better. Like, I felt this burst of energy. It's probably the
Oh,
antioxidant
totally.
factor.
Yeah.
But the fact that I wasn't chewing it, I felt like the digestion process was incomplete. The whole lingual,
Lingual neural.
yes,
Yeah.
right, all of that to the brain and the body, and getting prepared for digestion, like that wasn't fully there. And so I think it's a great idea to get started, but I think you're right. I think especially with kids, in order to have them get used to organ meats and those different flavors in their mouth and their palate, I think it's more beneficial that they actually taste the organ meats because, I mean, like you said, otherwise, I mean, who's going to freeze and cut it up for them so that they eat it when they're older, right? So,
yeah.
yeah.
I just want to add one last piece, which is don't give up. If you end up having to throw out, I don't know, half a cow tongue, that's okay. You know, you can cook it a different way another time. And just, yeah, don't give up on it because I think a lot of times we think, oh, I tasted it this one time and I didn't like it. I'm never going to like it again.
Yes.
And that, and just like in any thing in life, you wouldn't give up after one try. It's the same thing with food. So if one recipe doesn't go well and it's a total bust, throw it in the trash, give it to your dog. It's okay. Just call it a wash and try again.
Yeah, no, that's great words. I think I really feel like the whole organ meat fear is a lot of it is just it's in the head, right? So
Oh,
I
yeah.
think it's just, we're so used to eating muscle meats and eating, processed foods that smell and taste good, right? That like that light up your receptors in your head. And I think that maybe kind of off-putting smell or that metally flavor in your mouth
Yeah.
initially, I think it just turns people off. But they're so nutrient dense. That's probably why you taste these minerally flavors because there's so many nutrients in it, right? So I think
Yeah.
I mean, it goes back to if you want to have your kids thrive, like have these foods in your body, have these organ meats so that, you are eating the most bioavailable form of nutrients and not having to rely on supplements.
Totally. Couldn't agree more, Judy.
Well, this has been a great talk.
So,
Where can people find you and what are you up to next and then
yeah.
we'll also include all of it in our show notes as well.
Awesome. So currently I am only on Instagram right now, building out the website, working on that. I am taking clients right now and yeah, between that and my real food school kitchen project, which hopefully will be up and running in November, that's what I'm up to right now.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you for joining me. And yes, I will get all the show notes ready. And yeah, thanks again for joining me today.
Appreciate it, Judy. It was
Okay,
great.
bye. I will talk to
Bye.
you, Christine. Bye.
Okay, bye.
All right, guys, I hope you thought that was helpful. I hope that you have new ideas to feed organ meats to yourself and your family. And I hope you got to learn a little bit about respectful parenting. All right, guys, I will talk to you guys next week. In the meantime, eat a lot of meats, try to get some organ meats into you. And remember, take care of your body because it is the only place you have to live. All right, guys, have a good day and I will talk to you next week. Bye, guys.